Welcome to Green TV, the show dedicated to green, positive, New Deal solutions. The Independent Greens advocate for weatherization jobs, solar jobs, geothermal jobs, wind jobs, rail jobs, lots of jobs. Welcome today. We have here with us in the studio Kate Alexandrova.
Hello, everyone.
And Jim Hurysz.
Hi.
Jim is a longtime friend of mine, and he is a businessman, a former candidate. He's an independent, and we would like to talk with him today about building a case for going green and the urgency for going green. Jim is a statistician, and he has done a lot of research on this. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, it's good to see you all again, especially Gail. So what's going on? If you read the Washington Post today, or New York Times a couple days ago, there's a conference, serious global warming conference in Lima, and I think the world is starting to come to their senses, not coming to their senses as fast or as far as they should, but essentially things are at a point where we have to stop burning anything, everything, as soon as we can. We have to find massive replacements for combustion. And if you look at what we should be doing, there should be solar everywhere. And Virginia is way behind other states, other countries like Germany. But we just have got to stop burning. There's only 5 miles of atmosphere above us in the band around the Earth, and we're polluting that, and in various ways, and we've got to stop. Or at the minimum, global temperature is going to go up for 4 degrees by the end of this century, and most likely a lot more. And the decision makers really don't care. If you go around the Beltway, you go out on Route 50 to Winchester, you go out Route 29, any place. I mean, you see what's happened in the last 30 to 40 years where SUVs, McMansions, personal vehicles of all kinds, and we're polluting a lot. And the last few years, people have outdoor fire pits, chimereas, that sort of thing, and more planes, more vehicles, polluting.
Well, I know that you're all for encouraging the more effective use of motor vehicles. Could you be a little more specific on what measures can be taken? Everything
should be electric, and the electric should be generated by solar or geothermal, meaning hot water of some sort, and as a last resort, nuclear. So we should be shutting down everything that's burning, anything, petroleum, natural gas.
But
wood,
we'll understand
coal.
it's a lot of investment. So what's your prediction as far as time frame goes? When do you think it can be done?
It could be done pretty soon, because a lot of the stuff, a lot of the generating facilities are really old. So, for example, what you could do right now and what's being done in California is if you put a solar array on your house, you get 3 kilowatts out of that solar array during the daytime when it's hot, and when you can be powering your air conditioning heat pump right from the solar or putting it into the grid. So you can imagine there's billions of kilowatts of capability on the existing buildings, like this building, like warehouses, like shopping plazas, like homes, like garages.
Well, California seems to be very progressive in terms of being green, and I also know that they've enacted the toughest restrictions on air pollution, requiring a 25% reduction in carbon dioxide pollution.
Well, you know, all of that doesn't really mean anything, because if you look at the population growth, since she and I were born the same year, the population of the United States has more than doubled. So we're at 320 million now, and in 50 years we're going to have 130 to 150 million more people in this country, never mind the world.
So there's a correlation between polluting the atmosphere and the number of people that are on the Earth?
Oh yeah, and it's not only that. 40 years ago there were no SUVs. 40 years ago there were no McMansions. 40 years ago there were no personal watercraft. 40 years ago people didn't have fire pits in their backyard and tossing in logs.
Jim, can you tell us a little bit about what the average normal person could expect to see as a result of global warming? For example, would it increase their cost for cooling and for energy?
What the average person, depends on the age of the average person, depends on how old you are. So I'm 67 years old. I'm not going to see it. If I'm around when I'm 100, I'm just not going to care anymore because I'm going to be too old. However, a child born today is going to be 85 at the end of this century. And what that child is going to see, if we don't stop burning things to generate whatever, the child's going to see hell on Earth at the end of the century, hell on Earth.
So would you feel that we have a responsibility to preserve the Earth for future generations?
You have a responsibility to preserve the Earth for your children and grandchildren who are going to be around in 50 or 60 or 80 years.
Oh, this is a very, surprisingly short-term perspective from what you say, and we only have 85 years ahead of us before we see that hell on Earth. So
what does that mean?
That means that we need to do something right away, right now.
Yeah, well, hell on Earth means huge hurricanes, droughts, tornadoes, anything, huge blizzards, any weather extreme you can imagine, all in the same year.
Okay, this is enough scary for me to start wondering, what do we do now?
Mitigation.
Thing by thing.
You stop burning.
Stop burning consumable fuels.
Any kind of consumable fossil or
less
wood,
vehicles.
Anything that can burn and give off.
Own less vehicles. Use public transportation.
Well, the problem is population growth. So if you have twice as many people producing half the pollution, you have the same amount of pollution. And people don't correlate what's going to happen with their lives now. There's still McMansions being built everywhere. People are starting to buy SUVs again that get 12 miles a gallon because gas is a lot cheaper than it was a year or two ago. So essentially, unless there starts being hell on Earth in 15 or 20 years, people are just going to go on the same way.
Yes, they probably will, because they're learned patterns of behavior. But what would you suggest to change specifically? Well,
what I can suggest is, running for Congress and being on a really progressive platform and talking to a lot of people. Talking to people whose parents were in, like Gail in the Air Force, in the Air Force in the 1950s, 1960s, and their parents died, and they tell me what they were doing. And what they were doing is recovering extraterrestrial technology. And extraterrestrial technology that was powered by positrons, for example. And positrons are very energetic particles, a lot of energy in positrons. And if you capture that energy, wouldn't take many pounds of positrons to produce all the energy Washington metropolitan area needed for a year, several pounds of positrons. So there are things like extraterrestrial technology that could solve our energy needs, but that's all been squirreled away for the last 70 years. And I hope some future president will say, time to use it. But unfortunately, it looks like things will get to the point within 20 to 30 years that the global warming is going to be irreversible, and it's just going to be, things are going to be really bad.
You're watching Green TV on Channel 10 with Kate Alexandrova. I'm Gail Farrell-Parker, and this is Jim Hurysz, independent. And we're discussing today the need for urgency in going green and using solar energy, renewable energy sources. Jim, you were saying, what are some of the mitigating steps that we could take?
Well, besides the extraterrestrial technology that we have been squirreling away for 70 years, that, you know, the people in charge don't want to talk about. Although you can buy a model of the extraterrestrial spacecraft that crashed in Roswell. You can buy a model of that and build it yourself, and it's very accurate, including the little gray beings that flew it. And that was powered by positrons. Set up a huge electrostatic field. And if you know anything about electrostatic fields, like, you know, particles of toner in copiers, you set up an electrostatic field that the entire vehicle is like a charged particle, and it behaves that way. And so
Oh,
Well, that's way over my head, Jim.
And unfortunately, those
I'm trying to follow.
Unfortunately, those extraterrestrials happen to fly into some pretty severe thunderstorms, and that's what crashed them. And the thunderstorms interfered with the electrostatic field that powered their spacecraft. So, I mean, but just beside that, if we went and did solar water and solar photovoltaic in a huge way, we retrofitted every building with solar, and we only used fossil fuel and combustibles like wood, et cetera, methane, whatever. If we only use that very, very, very sparingly, basically to do things like to produce photovoltaics and a few other purposes, we could start reversing global warming within 10 to 15 years.
Well, how do you reverse it? From what I know, this damage cannot be reversed.
What happens is oxygen is constantly produced by algae in the ocean,
especially if we plant more trees.
And forests. And what we're doing is we are polluting the oceans, and we are destroying forests, where our oxygen, never mind the CO2, the O2 that we breathe and everything needs to survive. We're also destroying O2. So it's even more serious. You need, you can't survive with less than 9% of O2. We have typically 21% of O2. In some really polluted places, like some industrial places in China, the O2 is down to about 12%. And so on top of all the other nitrous oxide and all the other pollution, you have O2 depletion. So you have to look at everything in a perspective of, things are getting bad and they're going to get worse, and population growth in the United States. Well, there's in March, next March, there's going to be 1 million more people in the United States than there are today.
Wow, that's quite a change.
And we're going to add between 27 and 30 million people this decade.
Well, a lot of people out there, everything affects their pocketbook. So they don't get excited about anything, even global warming or extreme weather, until they know that it's going to hit them in the pocketbook. So how would global warming affect the average person in the pocketbook?
It's going to wipe out the food supply, one of the first things that's going to happen.
Because of the drought.
Because of the droughts, because of the hurricanes. The corn crop along the East Coast was wiped out by hurricanes a couple of years ago.
So biofuels would not be a solution?
So no, biofuels actually, they just prolong our burning a lot of fossil fuel, or renewable fuel, whether the fuel is alcohol or anything, butane, natural gas from fracking. You just don't want to do that anymore. You can't do that anymore. And so what happens is if you have this droughts, blizzards, floods, the impact of that on your food supply, and then if you decide we're going to have 560 million people, up from 320 million at the end of the century, what's that going to do? What are they going to eat? A child born today is going to live to be 85 years old. What's the last 20 years of that child's quality of life going to be from 2080 to 2100? Is that person going to be alive or going to be killed by a tornado or in a flood from a hurricane or from some other natural disaster? We're just living in a fool's paradise right now. We just believe things are going to go on for forever the way they're going, but they won't. And things will start changing within the next, very, very significantly within the next 15 to 20 to 25 years. And look at Virginia. Dominion could say, hey, we're going to start going full speed ahead on photovoltaic. And they're actually lagging really significantly behind Maryland, behind Delaware.
One of the reasons that the Independent Greens advocate for more candidates on the ballot is because we need more folks in Richmond to advocate for renewable energies. Right now, the solar farms in Virginia are limited in size to no larger than the Dominion Power solar farms, which is a very small percentage. So in order to change those laws, we have to have people in Richmond that are not obligated to those special interests of the utility companies and the power companies, so that we can have solar energy produced more freely in Virginia. Would you agree with that, Jim?
It gets worse if you see who we just elected in the 8th District, Don Beyer. Don Beyer made his fortune and makes his livelihood out of importing gas guzzlers that use premium fuel. Isn't Don Beyer Range Rover in Alexandria? 12 miles a gallon, premium fuel. Okay, and then you start looking really deep into what Range Rover owners actually do. And they have clubs that actually go out and they tear up the environment in these Range Rover four-wheel drive expeditions. And then, there are the Volvos, more of the same. If you look at any of Don Beyer's dealerships, there's no solar there on his dealerships. So that's who we elected as our next, I didn't vote for him, but that's who we elected as our next congressman. And insofar as the IGs, the IGs should be pushing for electric trains.
We do?
Electric trains and for local trains, for saving these freight rail lines, which are in danger of conversion into trails that people only use 6 months a year.
Light rail feeder systems?
And so, yeah, things like that are important. I also, I don't happen to believe in streetcars, because I opposed the Columbia Pike streetcar in Arlington. That streetcar would have been powered by coal-fired plants in western and southern Virginia. And I believe in hybrids, going towards all electric vehicles. Where we should be putting the money is in advanced battery technology, which will allow vehicles to be powered for long distances, meaning 200 miles and up, with batteries. And doing things like, we have millions of people in single-family homes with a garage. We should have plug-in power from the rooftop solar to the vehicle in the garage. I mean, that should have been done decades. We could have done that decades ago. Things like that, really simple stuff that would, if we had massive solar, both for solar water heating, for your bathroom, for school bathrooms, for school swimming pools, all kinds of
buildings,
condo
libraries,
buildings, apartments, everything, libraries, everything. If we did that, we would not only save the environment, but we'd put OPEC out of business within 10 years. Oil would be such a glut on the market. They would be selling gasoline to whoever was still using gasoline for 10 cents a gallon. Yeah. If we went massively into solar, massively into it, like everywhere.
And we could save $1 trillion a year if we didn't have war for oil. We could put that money into building solar and into building rail, electric-powered, solar-powered rail.
Well, I'm amazed that the IGs haven't done more to do basic stuff that you could do right now. And I've talked to Carrie Campbell about this. I've said, Carrie, get some train service, electric train service, down to Charlottesville from here. Electrify all of these lines. It's not a big deal to do, basically electrify. Interurbans were electrified 100 years ago. Get some interurbans going. Electrify all the rail. Get the local rail going. Save the freight rail. If no one is going to come into their senses, and if the population is going to go from, in 50 years, it's going to increase by 130 to 150 million. I mean, that's another thing. We're going to lose a huge amount of vegetation, a huge amount of cropland, and nobody cares about that. Fundamentally, before we think about the temperature going up 3 to 6 to 8 degrees, we should think about what are people going to be eating in 50 years if we keep on paving everything over.
Right. Well, one of the things I believe is that the voter hasn't realized yet that the lesser of two evils is still an evil, and we're offering positive solutions to the voters. So, Jim, how do we get the voters to vote green?
Well, because the media, meaning the Post, the local media, CNN, C-SPAN, Fox, they do two things. They scare us to death with, your kid is going to get kidnapped by some bad guy from the school playground, when in reality, the odds of that happening are something like 1 in 10 or 20 million. Okay? They scare us with things like that. And if you look at the way the people in the media live, whether it's the Post, or the editors of the Post, the publisher of the Post, Jeff Bezos, who owns the Post, if you look at the way they live this hugely extravagant lifestyle. I mean, they're flying around in corporate jets. They have 3 or 4 homes. And why should they care? Why should they care? And they don't. They scare us to death with this trivial stuff that's never going to happen to anybody. What is going to happen to somebody, they're not going to die from somebody kidnapping them from the school playground. They're going to die when their car is swept off the road in a flash flood, which happens, you know, hundreds and hundreds of times a year.
To me, in a nutshell, what can happen if we do not review our ways of living, our means of living, this global disaster, we're going to have that hell on earth that you talked about, and all other problems that are being widely covered are not going to look that bad next to that one.
Well, when you start having in 1 year huge blizzards, huge droughts, hurricanes, tornadoes, everything, and it happens 1 year, then it happens the next year, and then it happens the next year. People will definitely get people's attention when their homes are swept away.
You already got mine, Jim.
Yes, it's time for us to start doing more green things. Speaking of time, how are we doing on the time? How much time do we have left?
We have 1 minute? Okay.
Thanks. All right, we have about a minute and a half left. Jim, in about a minute, what would you like for the viewers to know? Most important about
we
the
have
urgency?
to come to our senses as a nation, as a world, and we got to stop right now doing what we're doing. But we're not. And everybody out there should be able to realize that, say, if you're 55, 60, probably you're not going to be around to suffer the consequences, but certainly your children will be. If they're in their 30s, they're going to be around 50 years. And if you've got grandchildren who are 2, 3, 4 years old, they're going to be around at the end of the century when things will be hell if we don't stop doing what we're doing right now. It's so far as the way we generate fuel, the way we power vehicles, the way we own vehicles, the way we do anything and everything in this society and around the world.
Well, Jim, we appreciate your efforts to make the world a better place.
Well, I'm just telling you what the reality is. Reality is hard. It's easy to watch reality shows on TV which are scripted, and the actor and wannabe actors do all the roles and say what they're told.
Well, us here on Green TV are very, very real, and we had Jim Hurysz today, who told us about the urgency of going green and the importance of this. And my name is Kate Alexandrova. This is Gail Parker, and here goes. Okay, all right.
Yay! All right. See you later.